Okay, so George, maybe a couple days ago, you posted a big update announcing that you were closing down your roughly $15,000 a month scriptwriting agency. You've made a wonderful video about it, talking through sort of some of the initial thoughts and feelings about that. Can you give us like your, couple minute update on like what happened, what's going on there?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I think we've spoken about this loads on the podcast, and we've kind of documented the whole journey of like how I felt about starting an agency, how you did as well, Gwilym, specifically from like a script writing perspective. And it was one of these things that was like, oh, maybe something I'd want to do at some point, maybe not. I had people approaching me about it all the time. Well, not all the time, but maybe 3 or 4 different people had come to me with a different way that they thought I could do it. And it was one of those things I felt like ultimately I probably didn't want to do. And there's evidence on this podcast of me saying that it's something that I probably didn't want to do. But then I decided to do it with a couple of guys who approached me about it. They had a slightly different, like just an interesting way of thinking about it. But ultimately, what ended up happening was I started it up and it felt exactly as I feared it would to run an agency. And so, I was finding after the first week, even the first couple of weeks, first 3-4 weeks, I was regularly going through these kind of like whiplash emotions of like, this is brilliant and I'm loving it, down to I hate this and I'm stressed and I can't really see the direction that this thing goes in. And so I remember speaking to my girlfriend, like genuinely after the first 4 weeks, like, I actually don't know if I like this and I ever will, but let's just give it 6 months, set a date and see what will happen. And I think I was thinking maybe like give it 6 months and see how I felt. And long story short, came to a head just over a week ago, where, yeah, I was just sat downstairs doing work early morning. I'd gotten up early to try and get all the deadlines kind of hit that we needed to hit. And then it kind of just clicked in my head. And I was like, this is every week and I don't like this, and more stress every week. So I need to stop it. And so I decided there and then to stop it. And a week later, had told all the clients, had told all the writers, and here we are. I'm in a post agency world and feeling lighter for it already.
So the video is fantastic in that like you go into more detail about how you were feeling. Like I can't remember what you described yourself as, being something like an entitled little gremlin or something, like in your like behavior towards other people, just because the work was just getting all consuming.
Yeah.
And yeah, I could relate to that, like putting things off, not going to social events, like eating dinner late or whatever because of the work. What I'm curious to talk about more is kind of the business implications. And so like, just to start off, what would success have looked like for the agency in like 6 months, a year, maybe in 3 years? Like what was realistically achievable? Like what were you giving up by not pushing through the pain?
Yeah, really good question. So I clarified this in the description of the video that I made. It was like, yeah, why I gave up my $15,000 a month agency type thing. And like 15,000 was what the kind of top line was likely to be in March. But they were like, as a result of, closing all this stuff down, I really, really respected the writers. I thought the writers were all brilliant. And so like there are some things like towards the end, like I've given them all a minor payout type thing as well. And so it's like, the margins on March are nowhere as good as they would or could have been. But essentially, if you imagine like, it was 15,000 with 4 or 5 clients, all having like varied amounts of interaction and like number of deliverables. But on the waiting list, we had say another 25-ish people. Obviously, not all of those people would have been appropriate necessarily, but like having scanned through, a lot of them had the budgets and a lot of them would have been interesting. So let's, imagine that we got 15 of those people in eventually. And so like doing the math, like in theory, if we'd got them, just those people all in, it could have been, top line 60,000 a month. But obviously, the issue, and this is what I was finding, was like I was doing the maths on some of this stuff, and the more I wanted to scale it out and the more people clients theoretically I wanted to bring in, the more I would need to plug other people in below me to do quality assessment on the scripts and all of that kind of thing. And so the margins would naturally decrease and decrease from that perspective. But this is all assuming A, we never raise the price that we charge clients. And well, actually, mainly just that. It's like pretty much that. But at the same time, like obviously over time, we would have paid the writers more and more and more. So I think this was my main thing. And I know I'm straying slightly from your question, but in a sense, it's like, yes, maybe we could have gotten to 60K top line in say 6 months, but how ultimately scalable would it be if the price of paying the writers would only go up at the same rate that we would be charging clients more? And do I want to live that life for 6 months just to get to that point? Additionally, we didn't I had no need to do any outreach for it. I was just at the point of having a website built for it and thinking about pushing it in the newsletter again. But those 25 people on that list came from one push that I did at the very start. And so there would have been more demand for this stuff. I just didn't have the wherewithal to create a structure to support it, basically.
Do you think things would have been different if you had like 50-50 co-founded it with someone else who was able to take on those things that you wouldn't have enjoyed doing?
Potentially. So I did co-found it with two other people, and we had a kind of 2/3, 1/3 split, where I had 2/3 and they took a third between them. And they were brilliant for getting the operation side of things sorted. And they had a lot more experience than me in terms of acquisition, structuring the agency, and all of that stuff. But in terms of what they were able to take away from me, once it was up and running, there wasn't really that much because I just had to be across all the scripts because that wasn't their area of expertise. And so, yes, if I had creatively co-founded it with someone else who was able to take on that work, like the day-to-day stuff, possibly. But as it was, once it was up and running, it was all on my shoulders essentially in terms of the day-to-day.
Really, what was the work like? And if bear in mind, if you're talking to people who don't know what it's like to review a script, etc., what were at the end of your video, you like tore down all these post-it notes on the wall of all the stuff you need to do for the agency. Like, what was on those post-it notes? Like, what was your normal week like at the agency?
This was the bizarre things that when I sit down to think about it, I'm like, what was I actually doing all day? And I think it was one of those tasks that maybe you guys have, or like anyone listening has, where you like the days would kind of expire and you wouldn't really be able to put a finger on what you'd been doing for any one portion of the day. And maybe that's on me for a lack of planning. But towards the end, especially when I was thinking, I need to systemize this stuff so that I can outsource it to quality assessors and people who would maybe take the comms off of my hands in future. I tried to systemize that stuff and it still didn't help. But broadly speaking, it's communication between me and the clients, me and the writers. It was looking ahead to kind of figure out which briefs we would have coming up that month, looking over the briefs, figuring out if there was anything that I needed to go back to the clients about, that maybe the brief didn't make sense or it was like a bad idea. I was pretty bad at that by the end, to be honest, because I was in such a rush. It ended up being my writers a lot of the time who would point out the flaws in the briefs, which, I really, really appreciated them for. So it was a bit of that. And then, reviewing a script, it can take half an hour or it can take all day because it really depends what other things are going on and how much brain power it requires. And often it wouldn't even be like, oh, a really long script that has been written badly will take the most amount of time. It could be something where it's just the hook isn't quite there, and I would spend hours just staring at it, trying to figure out how to correct it. And it was just mainly communication and then quality assessment, I suppose. But as I added this a lot in my video, the quality assessment wasn't that I was having to spend hours rewriting rubbish that my writers had done. It was often just like little tweaks that just required a lot of thinking, or maybe it required asking the client something, which then, they're in America, I'll have to wait 5 hours before I can get the response from that. But then it's kind of playing on your mind. And it was just a bit of a maelstrom of madness, which I can't really quantify.
All right, so to play devil's advocate for a moment, if being drained because at the end of every week you had so many scripts that you had to work on, was it possible for you to essentially double the price and half the amount of clients you have? And that way, theoretically, just reduce the amount of hours that you have to work per week?
Potentially. I think doubling it might have been a bit nuts, because I think I was, I never wanted to push much beyond what I had ever charged individually as a kind of sole, a freelancer writing scripts for people. And I think the amount I would have had to have pushed it for it to have made it worth it, and for it to have allowed me to have halved the number of clients, I think would have pushed. And in fact, just before this recording, we were talking about feeling a little bit uncomfortable about when you're pitching prices for things to people, like various collaborators and sponsors and whatever else. But it's like, I think it would have just pushed into the realms of ridiculousness if I tried to do that. So there was definitely scope to push things upwards, but yeah, probably not that much.
So do you feel that the agency model for script writing is just not possible, just because of like the prices of having to pay script writers, how much you can realistically charge, of how much people would pay? You think this is just an agency that's too soon in the creator economy to be able to really charge what's needed to make it a success?
I don't think so. I think it's just it's about having the systems in place to be able to train writers efficiently, so that you're able to scale up the number of writers that you bring in. Because I think you're in this position where you don't want to be overcharging the clients, but you don't want to be underpaying the writers. And I think it's probably one of those things where it's just, at least in my experience, if you're paying the writers properly, it's going to be not low margin agency, but maybe something that's lower margin than, like, we see it all the time, like people with other sort of like YouTube related agencies, is that maybe they'll deliberately hire talent that's really cheap to be able to keep their margins high. And for me, it's like, I don't know, with the script writing, maybe it's possible to do that, but at least in my experience and like the things that I've seen and the people that I've had email me, when you're lowballing a writer, the result is just not good. And so I think it's probably a lower margin per client agency than, say, something like an editing agency could be, although that is anecdotal and I don't really have data to support that. So I think it would just be like, it would be the volume play in terms of getting more and more clients, more and more writers, but that would have required the training. And I think had I only been working on the agency, the training thing could have been something I could have put more time into. But it was the fact that I was running the agency plus everything else, basically.
So like we discussed this so way back when, George, right? Like whether either of us would ever want to start a script writing agency. And I think, the things that put me off doing it was always, I think the main thing was always knowing that good writers are hard to come by. And I always felt that a good writer would know that they could probably go and do things by themselves after just a couple months. Especially if they're writing scripts for people like, I don't know, Ali Abdal or maybe Colin Samir, or someone else, like these types of creators who talk all the time about working for yourself and figuring things out and hustling and posting on Twitter. So I was thinking, after a few months of setting up my hypothetical agency, it would soon become a problem with writers just dropping off, and I would become basically this training center creating my competition. And that I suppose I would also feel that it takes a lot of creative energy to edit a script properly, as you've been saying. And when you're working on one script for 2 days, then in your off time, you're also kind of working on it because you're having thoughts, things bubbling away in the background. And then you come back to the script with your fresh ideas. You can't cram, it's harder to cram 6 script edits into those 2 days and get them all done to the same level that you do just one script before. So those are some of my thoughts on starting an agency.
No, I totally agree. And I think that was that was part of it. And the interesting thing I've discovered, just to your first point, since closing this thing down, and like we're still at time of recording, we're still kind of winding things up. It's, we've got a couple more weeks left of this month that the clients have paid for, and we're obviously fulfilling, all of those obligations, and the writers are all, still doing their thing. But in a couple of the cases, we've now removed that arbitrary wall that sits between the writer and the client. And what I was finding, because I was stretched so thin, my presence was actually a disservice to the overall process, because it's sometimes people would need an answer to something quickly because they needed to make a decision about the script, which way it should go. And I wouldn't see that message for a couple of hours because I'd be so busy doing, another script review or talking to another client or whatever else it is. And actually, if the writer had just been able to ping the client directly, it would have sped everything up. And things have started in some of the cases that, for these clients that we're still fulfilling for the rest of this month, things are speeding up now that I'm not there. And that was definitely one of those little things that totally speaks to what you're saying, Gwilym. And I don't know. It's like it is almost. It feels a bit like a mental trick where you're trying to encourage these writers. You're trying to train them up. You're telling them how well they're doing when they're doing well. But at the same time, for the agency to function, you have to hope that they don't take that too much to heart and decide to just start tweeting about what they're doing and then get picked up by other people and realize, hang on a second, I can easily go and work with other people. And I think what's happening, candidly, I'm trying to think if anything bad can come of like saying this stuff, but naturally, right, the agency model is you're charging a certain amount, there have to be some sort of margin, so therefore you're paying the person fulfilling that service less than what you're charging the client. And in a couple of the cases, the clients that we've been working with and the writers that I've been working with are continuing to work together, but without me in the middle kind of skimming my agency owner bit. Granted, the value that is lost there potentially is that I'm no longer the person there overseeing stuff, and so you lose the experience that I have in that process. But ultimately, I think it's likely to get to a position where the people involved in this situation, the clients are able to charge less, but that lesser amount is still going to be more for the writer than they were getting paid when I was, taking my bit off the top. And so overall, I think that's it. It just doesn't, I feel better internally at not doing that anymore. I think that's a big thing for me.
It feels like this potentially could have been better as you're almost like a recruiter, because it sounds almost like a recruiter sort of model of, I have all of these contacts. I can put you in contact with one of these writers who is a freelancer, and you work directly with them and you take, 20% off the top or something like that. Because whilst you're saying, oh, I had an agency, I had these script writers, the more I hear about it, I'm like, the reason why it was hard for you is because you have this idea of, well, they could go off and charge the same amount and just be a solo operator as a freelancer and not have to go through me. And to Gwilym's point, these people could just leave. But that's because most agencies have employees where they have a contract that says you cannot go and poach the client and you can't just leave and go and work with them. Whereas with your agency, you didn't have any of that because you didn't have employees. You had freelancers, freelance writers. So yeah, it sounds just like, if you had contracts and you had a set rate per month that they were paid, then yes, there would have been higher margins and whatnot, and you would have solved a lot of those problems. Which then maybe you could have hired someone for, a much higher rate who could actually be on your level in terms of that creative review. But again, these are all like hypotheticals. But yeah, I feel like for you, it definitely sounds like having you were the middleman recruiter sort of approach might have been better, or potentially that's what you could turn this into, like a web page that people just go onto and they pay a fee and they get access to all of these different writers.
Yeah, that is exactly what's happening now, funnily enough. That's kind of, we're still figuring out the nuts and bolts of it, but something like that. And I think that's one thing that I found this, and maybe this will lead into like a wider discussion around how you guys like feel about what you're doing. But I've always felt really proud and kind of proud of and behind all the stuff that I'm doing, because it always feels like it's in service of a valuable goal for everyone. So like, yes, I'm running a business, I need to make money, but ultimately I want whatever I do to be in service of the people who are paying me for whatever it is that I'm doing. And I think the agency, and I spoke about this in my video, I won't go into it loads, but like it was definitely, there was like a money focus about this that hasn't been present with anything else that I've done, which feels a bit like ugh. But I realized that kind of switching, my goal with this is to be able to expand who I can help, essentially. And the agency model was one way of doing that. But I realized actually a more efficient way and a more kind of generous way of doing that is a combination of what you were saying, Jamie, but having like essentially some sort of mentorship thing where I can find people who are doing fairly well at this stuff. Maybe they've got a few clients, maybe they're already really, really good. And basically, yeah, create this curated list of writers that I can recommend, but maybe people who have, uh, certifying is probably like the wrong phrase, but some kind of certification adjacent thing where I can be like, right, they've worked with me for this many months, or I've spent this many months helping with the scripts that they've been writing for their clients. And now they are someone that I firmly recommend. And so I think actually creating this like bedrock of really, really good script writers who can then go off and do their own thing, service all these different clients, make loads of money themselves, feels nicer than having the agency model where it just feels a little bit less generous, and it feels like I'm kind of holding you back slightly because I need to take some money off the top.
Like part of your job there is to kind of keep this veil of secrecy and mystery
exactly
going all the time for all the people you're dealing with, essentially.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a negative way of putting it, but yeah.
Yeah. I agree.
I have questions for you about the future, George.
Okay.
All
right, Mom.
I want to know. So, I mean, what do you think you learned from doing this beyond this was not a good fit? Don't just gun for money at the expense of other things in your life. Are there kind of things that you've learned? Have you become a better script writer? Things like that?
Potentially. I think, well, to start, like the one thing I mentioned in my video a lot at the end was like a sense of being properly honest with yourself and not ignoring certain feelings. Because as discussed, we talked about in the podcast a lot that I didn't want to do this, and then I did it anyway, and then it turned out my instinct for all those months and from those discussions, and even your instinct as well, it's like someone in the same space doing the same thing, Gwilym, was that it wouldn't be fun, or that it wouldn't work, or that you'd feel a certain way, and then I felt exactly that way. So learning to trust your own instincts,
like your guts,
yeah, exactly. When it comes to like a business thing, and I get it, sorry, this is like a tangent. I know that there was some like, I would say, bad takes on what I'd said, where like some people were like, in life, if you don't push through the pain, you're never going to realize your goals. And it's like, yeah, you're right. I've never worked hard on anything. You are quite right. I should probably have just carried on hating my life for the next 6 months. So I get that it's nuanced and that some things are hard and worthwhile things are difficult. But yeah, learning to have that little distinction between like something that is hard but worth it and hard but you hate it is really important. But the other thing, like the major thing for me is like figuring out what you actually enjoy in something. And this goes for whether you are self-employed or full-time employed. Like speaking to some friends of mine who are in more traditional kind of city jobs with a standard promotional ladder, where it's like they've gone in with a base skill, say it's like engineering or accountancy or something like that. And a couple of promotions, it means like, yep, cool, you're still dealing with numbers, or you're still repairing machines or designing parts for a car or whatever. But then you get to a certain level of promotion, and suddenly like all of that base skill is taken from you. And what you are doing now is administering other people. And yes, you kind of have to have your finger on the pulse of like how everything works. But ultimately that base skill that you got into this for is no longer what you're spending your time doing. And I've had, and honestly, this thing that I've talked about has had more responses across my newsletter and on Twitter, and I put this on YouTube as well. And so like people finding this that I've never previously interacted with. And I've had some really interesting emails from people who have been like, so one example was a teacher who was like, yes, I was a teacher, I love teaching. And then I got this promotion I opted to go for this role where suddenly I was having to do all this administration stuff. And actually, after a couple of years, when I went back to being just a teacher, presumably for a bit less money, I don't know, but suddenly it was like, oh yeah, this is the actual thing that I love, and this is what makes me happy. And so I think that's the thing, is thinking like promotion or scaling up or whatever isn't necessarily good if you're no longer doing the actual task that you that you enjoy doing. And I wonder if you guys have ever kind of strayed into that position where, for the purpose of money, prestige, progress, whatever it might be, and actually you realize, am I actually doing what I thought I liked anymore or not?
I think what I well, I think I've spoken about this before, but I definitely feel that just doing script writing as opposed to doing script writing and also channel management feels a little bit constraining. And once you do the channel management, it feels a little bit more um, like you have like a broad, like you've climbed up the mountain a little bit higher, and suddenly you can see more of a horizon. You get to have more of a say in what the videos you're going to be filming are. You get to work with more different people, and um, I think that it's nice to feel more in control, because when you're writing scripts, ultimately you send the script off to the creator, and then you kind of see what happens afterwards. Um, so yeah, I think it's nice having, in some cases, it's nice having a broader role and more control.
Mm. Yeah. Jamie?
But on the topic of on the topic of doing something that you know you shouldn't have, I've had it a few times that I've written scripts where I was like, oh my God, why did I do this? This is not fun. This is draining, and I'm not sure this content is doing anything for the world in a positive way either. So what am I doing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that before where I've worked on like thumbnails, for example, and it just keeps going because client wants to keep tweaking things, or they never really had a clear brief at the beginning, and it just kind of like, I'm so done with this now. Like, let's finalize it and move on. Um, and I kind of just think, oh, why did I accept this? You know, I didn't have to make these set of thumbnails. Um, but for the most part now, like I'm pretty good at kind of just going with my gut instinct and being like, I don't want to work with that person, or I'm going to like end the relationship here and like not work on it any longer. And I think it's just a muscle that you strengthen over time, because again, you've kind of got to go through that to understand what you like and what you don't like. Um, and even from away from client things, you know, we've spoken about this on the podcast before, but when I was like, I need a low ticket offering for people who want to work with me, but I'm currently at capacity with my consulting calls. Let me start the thumbnail vault, which I started. And, you know, it just took so much time away from consulting and channel management and thumbnail design that I was working to build up this project. That at the time was only making like £200 a month, whereas a single hour of my consultancy at that time was £250. So I was having like a net gain of £50 for a single hour compared to $200 in an entire month from the customers that I had. And it was just like, I'm not financially benefiting from this. And I don't particularly enjoy it as much as collaborating with a YouTuber on building out their YouTube channel in those consulting calls. And so I very quickly let's say killed, it's still active. I still work on it from time to time, but it's when I want to work on it, as opposed to I have to build up this thing and make it, you know, the biggest tool that it could be. I do go back and forth on that. Sometimes I'm like, I can definitely see how I could improve this tool and probably market it more, because I haven't marketed it. It has over 1,000 users. It's consistently growing. Um, and I could definitely take it somewhere. But again, it's just like gut reaction of, do I really want to commit to this? Because I feel like it has to be a commitment. It has to be a decision where you're like, yes, I'm going all in on building this thing. Because otherwise, if you're just in that middle ground where you're really committed for a week and then you decide, actually, I've got other things I want to focus on, or I'm not enjoying it, I just think it makes the whole process way more miserable compared to if you just decided I'm all in or I'm all out.
George, now that you're out of the agency, what are you looking forward to doing with the time you've got back?
I think this is my year for just making what I already do be better. And I think maybe because we discussed obviously like this whole situation briefly last week before we recorded another episode, and like this came up in my video as well. This sense that like every year up to now, since getting into the creator economy, we've all made more money than we had the previous year, and it kind of becomes a bit of a hamster wheel where you think, well, it's probably going to happen anyway, naturally, because like I'm doing all these new things and I can charge more for this and charge more for that. But if it starts to look like it's not going to happen, then I need to make it happen, because if I don't make as much, then what's the point of all this? And that was part of the mindset which contributed to the agency. And now I'm aware that I've got all these really nice parts of my business that I love. So I've got the newsletter, which I really enjoy writing when I have the time. And I always make sure it comes out, but I don't always have the time to enjoy it. It can be a bit of a rush, or it'll come out an hour late or whatever. So I've got the newsletter, I've got my community, my paid community around my course, and the course itself. And I think that's broadly it. And so I want to make my community the best possible thing that it can be, because candidly, like I haven't spent as much time in it as I would want to in the last 2 months, because of the agency was taking up too much time. And then the course, like, I want to re-record it. I stand by everything that's in it, but I did it in an Airbnb, and you can see in a couple of the lessons, I'm like a bit tired, and I want to just, do a proper reshoot, get all of that, make people feel when they land on it, like this is the course, this is what I paid for, and I'm already excited about it. And then on the newsletter side of things, I really want my business to go towards, obviously, this like educational thing where I'm talking about potentially mentoring people and helping people get better at script writing, but to set up to go more the direction of like a Kieran Drew or a Justin Welsh or a Jay Klaus type thing, where it's like a digital products, and I know community is just the Jay Klaus thing. It's not so much a Kieran Drew thing or a Justin Welsh thing anymore, but digital products, community, that sort of thing, and just optimizing like all of that stuff, like my newsletter funnels and flywheels and all of that stuff. I feel like it was everything I've done up to now has been set up in a bit of a rush, and then it's been move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. And now I've got 2 years worth of this stuff that is actually a fully formed business, but is rough around the edges, and I want to smooth those edges.
It sounds like you sound like a gardener who's finally getting back to his garden, and he's able to go around and water all the parched plants that he cares about more than whatever it is he was doing before.
Yes, I think that's a great way of describing it. Jamie, in a previous episode, we talked about this idea of like a potential course that you were going to do. And in the last few weeks, like we've spoken about it again. And I wonder, in light of this conversation, like how are you feeling about that at the moment?
Yeah, so I've gone like back and forth in my head of like how I want to approach this course. What do I want to talk about in that course? Do I want to still do it? Because it came around at the beginning of the year of, what do I want this year's focus to be? And I had a number of different ideas, and for like a week, I was set on this course and was like, this is going to be a thing. And maybe it still will be in the future, but it's kind of taken a bit more of a back seat now. Mostly because I was thinking like, you know what, I was wrapped up in the excitement of this course at the beginning of the new year, and it kind of like died down a bit. And then I thought twice about it and was like, actually, I'm not sure. And the conclusion I came to, it was very similar to you actually in this regard of like, let me just go back to the basics of the consulting, and let me just focus on making that better. And with my channel management / YouTube producing work, let me work on making that more efficient. Because this is basically like the largest part of my business. It's what I enjoy doing the most. And the idea of thinking, how do I write a course, and spending, months with Notion open writing out these lessons, as you said, you went through. I was like, do I really enjoy that? And my gut reaction was no. And I think we did touch on it in a previous episode that maybe I should launch the course and the community at the same time and build it with the community, because that would be way more fun than me locking myself away for like 6 months working on this thing. And so, all of that to say, at the moment, it's currently paused whilst I kind of just continue to actually improve upon the basics. And I've heard, from so many big people that the most advanced technical business owners are the people who do the basics very well. And so for me, it was similar to you. It's like, let's just revisit that for the next 3 months and just wait for when I get that gut reaction of that's something that excites me. what's on top of that hill over there? Let me go and explore and actually try and conquer it, as opposed to, oh, I heard you should probably go and do this thing. You should probably have a course. And then what course should I make? Get excited by it. And then it kind of fizzles out and you're going to brute force your way through, similar like you were with the agency. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's good. I think, yeah, taking that minute to reassess. And was it something that we talked about with when we worked with Ali, that there'd be this rule of time that he had to still be excited about something before we actually move anywhere with it?
Yeah, that's the exact thing that I took in advance. Was he would always have these ideas for videos, or let's change the podcast, or let's change the content production system. And Gwilym and I would be like, oh God, not again. It's like the third time in this month. And so, yeah, we all started to implement this thing of Ali of like, okay, we'll do that, but we have to wait 48 hours. And if you're still excited about this new change, then we will implement it.
Because disclaimer, people are happy to move fast, generally speaking, and get excited, but it's more like moving fast multiple times in a row in different directions that then lands you in trouble.
Without letting the dust settle. And that's for me, like when I decided maybe this course isn't for me, I kind of said, let me give myself at least 2 to 3 months of focusing on the consulting and YouTube producing, and then I'll revisit it and see if I'm still excited about it, or if I can come at it from a fresh perspective. And then actually it might be interesting. And, in regards to a course, the previous topic that I had, I'm now like, why don't I just make a thumbnail course? That's what I was going to make last year. I have way more experience in that area. It seems way more simple for me to make a thumbnail course. And so like, that's something that I'm thinking about. But again, I'm not being like, this is the focus for the next 3 months and committing to it and making it this thing. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Thanks for watching or for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, you can subscribe to us on YouTube or on any podcast platform you enjoy.